Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker, back at you with another interactive class out of the secret library of the Connected Universe. We have a great one up for you this evening, although I will admit I might be a little punch drunk. I just did a 2.5 hour, a little bit over 2.5 hour interview. So my faculties are still here, but we'll see how this goes. I see some people are already in here early. Jill Nimchinsky, Tom McNicholas, wonderful to see you already in there. I'm going to try to make it. We might not be able to go the full hour, but I will certainly try. So tonight we're going to be talking about, I've called this Lost to Time, the generational gaps. I've based this off of my latest Morning Mug video, Mike's Morning Mug, there on the Connected Universe portal, connecteduniverseportal.com, of course, where I was talking about the generation gap. And so we'll get into that here in a little bit, but I do want to let those know that are listening to the podcast version of this later. Please join us every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, connecteduniverseportal.com. A lot of other great information and wonderful things out there as well. A great community. So, we've got there's a community part of it where we can all interact. There's the behind the scenes videos, of course, the Mike's Morning Mugs video that we are just talking about, video blogs from all these wonderful places. We have of course, the weekly classes here, but also the after show for those that are actually members of the Connected Universe portal, and so much more, exclusive articles and all kinds of things. That's connecteduniverseportal.com. And those that are already members, you guys get that app. You'll be notified of every time that we go live, and when posts are made and all that wonderful stuff, when interactions are happening there within the community. Of course, also, I have to throw this in there. The Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour coming in April 16th to the 28th, 2044. And this is actually very pertinent now, because for those that follow me on social media know that my episode on Stargates on Beyond Belief with George Honoria and Gaia TV just dropped today. So we talk about Egypt's Area 51, Stargates, wormholes, all that fun stuff. We have clips in there, video clips featuring my tours with Mohammed Ibrahim, Johnny Enoch's in there as well. So you want to check that out. That is on Gaia. When I get to it, because it's been a crazy week so far, I will put that link down there in the description. I'll have to do that post show because it's already too late. So, but check all those wonderful things out. I don't want to delay too long here. I see more people are starting to join here. David Gosling is in the house as well. So I want to get into, what am I talking here? The generation gap. What is lost to time? Okay, so this really was all inspired here just recently by, my parents have their 50th wedding anniversary coming up here this weekend. It's actually Friday. We're celebrating it on Saturday. A bunch of families coming over, and we're having a big to-do and all that sort of stuff. So it's one of those things, one of those aspects of it. I was scanning in, and I still am, actually, but I had this whole big box of photos from them. I spent pretty much almost my entire Sunday, but I'd already done some beforehand, because we're going to do like a big slideshow on the TV, music playing and all that, of basically their life from when they were kids, got married, had my sister and I, and grandkids and all that stuff. So I'm scanning in all these photos, and I've talked a little bit here in Connecting the Universe and on the portal and what have you, about that generation gap and the effects that it has over time. That's really what we're going to be talking about this evening. What gets lost to time as those gaps occur. So I'm actually going to start this with a clip from that Morning Mug video that I posted. It was yesterday now. All the days are quickly becoming a blur once again. But I'm going to play a clip from that, and then we'll dive into all of this. So, but it's had me thinking here. A lot of things. There's stuff I've thought about before. That, we're only here for a short period of time.
the human longevity, can get up if you're lucky 90, 100 years. But average lifespan is a little bit shorter than that. And it's a blink of an eye, really. You consider the whole grand scheme of the planet, the universe, and all of that. I'm looking back at these photos, and I'm seeing, my parents when they were young, and my grandparents, some of the adventures that they had, and knowing that my grandchildren will never know my grandparents. My grandparents passed away some years ago now. My children, fortunately, got to meet them and interact with them for a little bit. And my niece, Jordan, actually shares the same birthday as my grandfather. So, like when we celebrated her birthday this past year, we also raised a toast to my grandfather. Over time, that kind of recognition will go away because the subsequent generations will have no clue and no idea who these other people were. And if you're fortunate enough, I am very fortunate that I have a lot of the old family photos. I have a lot of recorded history from my family, at least as far as my dad's side is concerned. My mom's side, I have some stuff, but details are scant. But I've been very fortunate that it goes in like threes. That generational gap happens after the third. So you'll have grandparents, parents, children, and by the time those children start growing up, the grandparents generally start to fall away. You might end up with a great grandparent situation in there, maybe a great aunt or a great uncle, but you only have maybe like one or two from that generation. And they're the ones telling stories about, back in the day. I have a photo over here. Let me grab it real quick. This one here. So I'm the baby in this photo. It's my grandmother holding me. My father's behind. My grandfather. This woman here is my grandfather's aunt. She, because of the familial situation, she essentially raised him. So 4 generations. I'm the only one from my generation that she actually met. She actually passed away 3 months after that photo was taken.
Yeah, so that was Aunt Bicky in that photo, Alberta Grant. And what's interesting is a lot of the family stories that come down from that line essentially came from her. And when we go back, we try to confirm some of those things. It becomes difficult because it's like, okay, this was a story. How do you confirm the settee over here in the corner that you guys can't see? How do we confirm that Ulysses S. Grant sat on that? Well, it becomes a little difficult. How do you trace his steps in the provenance of that Victorian settee? It becomes a little difficult. So I see if Jack McCarthy is in the house. Great to see you this evening, Jack. Sir Yusuf is here as well. Tom McNicholas saying my hair is lost. Very cute, Tom. Yeah, coffee break scared him, huh? And then Yolanda Alvarado, great to see you as well. So yeah, there becomes over time a disconnect, and so those of the younger generation really have no conception of those from the older generation. Yeah, I've heard some stories about Aunt Becky. I've heard about some of the different aunts that lived with her, aunts for those from New England. And it's stories that I'm recording, but really have no concept of, other than this was the older generation. This was, somebody that raised my grandfather. And then looking back before that, you see that there was another cluster of family members, and they're all, they were buried more on the east side of Cleveland. It's kind of like the family migrated east to west. And you see how they were very, well interconnected, much like, when my grandparents were still around, we were having like Christmases and Thanksgiving. It's about to be Thanksgiving here and in the holidays, where we were going to, my grandparents' house, and that's where everybody gathered, and you would have the different generations there all interacting with each other. And then, as my grandparents passed away and Thanksgiving and Christmas was no longer there, that kind of broke off into, other people's households. So this coming weekend, we're actually doing a little Thanksgiving thing for my mom's side. They have not held a Thanksgiving all together on that side since my grandfather on that side passed away in 2006. So it's kind of like we're trying to recreate that, but it's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the same. But we're talking that gap, things being lost to time, information along the way, right? My father he's a tool and die maker by trade. So he was essentially a machinist in his professional career. So he was the guy that, made the machines that either made other machines or made the machines that made the parts. And that was his thing. Very, very good at it. And he's always had a fascination for woodworking. Yeah, we do the wine too now, by the way, over the last 15 years. But ever since he could do it, which was before I was born, he was always working on these different woodworking projects. And he has essentially built his own house before too, not this one that they're currently living in, but the one beforehand. And he's just really finished his man cave down there. Well, not quite. He still is building the bar into it, but he's done all kinds of like furniture projects. This is back from like 1993, right? This was a hutch that he was building back then, and again, very, very good. And yes, by just the nature of being his son, I picked up some of those skills because I'd go down there and, I'd help him out and he'd show me a couple things. He'd show me the different tools, how things worked, all of that sort of stuff. But I never really became a woodworker, a carpenter or what have you in my adult life. It's like, if pressed into that need, I could do it. I mentioned him essentially building his own house, and he's done he's built his man cave there. He was always like at any of the houses that we lived in. There was always like some room that he was remodeling or whatever, and of course I helped along the way. So one of the houses that I lived in, I did finish the basement there, and with his help, he helped out with a lot of it too. So there was some work in tandem there together, and then some things I did on my own because I could. I knew how to do some of it, but nowhere near as skilled as he was. We're both creative people. I inherited that trait. We'll talk a little bit about inheritance here in a bit, but I'll never be as good as him unless I really practice, and then maybe, almost 50 years into this thing now. He's been doing it longer than I've been alive. I think he's got some years on me there, so I probably won't ever be as good if I started now. But so that wasn't ever something that I became good at, and so that started to get lost in me. Right now, what about my kids? Well, they were there when we were doing that finishing work on the basement. We never built any furniture together like I did with my dad. They had wood shop class. So that knowledge has gradually decreased and decreased and decreased over the years from generation to generation. I mean, there are some families in which, that gets passed on, like, these family businesses, because this person, followed in their father's footsteps and the next person. But if you don't have that, that knowledge becomes lost over time. My dad has even remarked here that I've got all this knowledge. We've had this discussion. I have all this knowledge. I want to be able to give it to somebody. So I gave him a video camera last Christmas or the Christmas before. And I just said, here, record it. Just record it all. He's toyed around with the idea of doing YouTube videos and stuff like that before, but any of the other stuff that he's been doing here lately, and I've talked to him about it. He's like, I don't know when to set it up or how to angle it or whatever, so he doesn't do it. But he still, talks about, I don't have anybody to hand that knowledge down to, which is, kind of sad, because none of the, grandchildren that are around are picking up on it, and I didn't. We're just, again, creative in different ways. I have my writing, I do the video work, I do that sort of stuff. He was woodworking and machines. So when you have that knowledge not being passed down, over time, it will be lost. That, I don't know how to use half the stuff down there. The grandkids know even less. Their kids, they might not even know who grandpa, their great grandpa would be at that point. We'll see. There may be a small child or two that sneaks in there and ends up knowing him. Well, we see this sort of thing elsewhere as well. I'm using my dad as an example here. There was you see this in a lot of different historic sites. The example that I'm going to use here is a cemetery. Those of you that have been around the channel for a while, that have been following me for a long time, I say the channel's changed over the years, and I'm talking YouTube here for those that are listening to the podcast later. I had a series of Lost Cemeteries videos, and this is one of them. But I know the backstory of this particular cemetery, and this is in Campsville, Illinois. It's like basically up on a hill that, if the shrubbery wasn't all around, the trees hadn't grown up, you would be able to see the Illinois River, which was the original idea for this particular cemetery, was that the ones who had passed in the town could overlook the river. And people used to go up here all the time. This is, it's not on private property, but to get to it, you have to go through private property to get to it. So it's not like, it's not really publicly accessible. It's kind of hard to get to, and you kind of have to ask permission to walk up there and go to the cemetery. But the townspeople would go up here to take care of it, clean up the graves of their loved ones, leave flowers, all of that sort of stuff. But over time, the act of doing that has fallen away. I mean, some people within the town still, remember who's buried there, and they still have loved ones there, but now they're really too old to make the trek up that hill. You're talking like people that are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and then beyond. They're pretty much gone at that point. So they're no longer going up there to rake the leaves and cut down the weeds and these saplings and things that have grown up all over here. Some of them are actual trees. They're not coming up here to do this anymore. And the younger generation, they're not doing it because they didn't know those people. They didn't have a relationship there. They're just like, oh yeah, my great grandpa's buried up there, and great grandma and all those. I didn't know them. So they have no connection there other than, it's their family history. They have, no emotional tie to go up there and do that. The connection gets lost. And so that becomes a lost cemetery. Those people have become lost to time, which is sad. That's something like that has happened. Give it some more decades down the road, and how much more of that will just be completely gone and hidden. You got some comments down in here. I'll take a look here real quick. Sage Sleuth is in the house. Love your show and the directions you take. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Great to have you aboard again tonight. So Sarah, do you believe the loss of certain types of information can affect the essence of what is being passed? I think I understand what you're asking there, and we will get into that as we go along. Because yeah, kind of like with my father there, um, the woodworking aspect is not going to get past. What did get past is the creative spark, and that goes back to um, we've done classes on uh, DNA, and I've called those like supernatural DNA because we've covered a lot of different aspects. The um, the genetic marker needs to be in place for it to like come naturally to you, right? That genetic marker already needs to be in place for you to go that way. So my dad, when I was conceived, he had done some woodworking. He had done certainly some, machining at that point because he was in his apprenticeship. Actually, he had completed his apprenticeship and he was, starting his career at that point. So he had that in place, all the woodworking ability and how, because I've seen that evolve over the years from smaller projects and things that were average to magnificent things that he's creating now. That has evolved over the years. I was conceived, before that evolution. So have that creative spark, that creative mind there, not the woodworking skill that was implanted. Although, from my understanding, we did have a cabinet maker way back in the day, which is probably where he kind of got some of that from. Um, yeah. So my angle went with writing and subsequently video work. So it just took a different direction. Let's see. Yep, Jen is in the house. Yeah, I'm here from New England. Sorry, because I mentioned New England. So it's good to see you, my love. And let's see. And yeah, engineering mindset passed down. Absolutely. So yeah, that's the piece that got passed down. Mm-hmm. So see what else you have. You guys have a nice conversation down there. That's great. Mr. Cuban, psychic abilities get passed down through generations. Yeah, absolutely. So that's again another one that's a genetic marker, and that's why. And so sometimes it'll skip generations. So it's one of those when we looked at. I don't want to get totally into this right now because we've done that in past classes. It's one of those like it can be a part of your DNA strand, but there are ones that are turned on and turned off. Okay. So it could still be a part of your DNA, but if that's not switched on, you're not going to have that. But it might get passed down to the next generation. And when that next generation gets that DNA, it might be switched on. So that's where that kind of comes into play. Oh, very cool. David says, a cemetery here 3 minutes away that I walked through that dates back to the 1740s. I love those old cemeteries like that. So Jen and I had one there in Westfield, Massachusetts, like one of the oldest cemeteries in the country. They call it the Old Burying Grounds. And it was in 5th grade. We went down there, did gravestone rubs. There's some of them dating back to the 1600s, and they're beautiful. I love those old graves. Stacy Comiskey in the house. Great to see you, Stacy. Fantastic. Yeah, definitely been a little while. All right. So moving on though. Okay, we've talked about the way that the newer generation doesn't relate to the older one. They didn't know them, right? The older generation, as they move along through time. Okay, we talk about a lot about time here and time travel and what have you. 2.5 hours to talk about time travel earlier this evening. They start to not recognize the world anymore. It becomes very, very different for them. You think about somebody that was born, I want to say turn of the century, but we're 23 years into this particular century. So somebody born at the turn of the 20th century. Okay, no idea about cars, telephones, airplanes, right? No concept whatsoever of those things. Those things were just a couple of them, phone and car were just starting to come into play a little bit, but they're few and far between, very, very scant. Um, Plane would have been a few years later. And you look at it now. Um, we've got cell phones, of course, all kinds of airplanes. We've got rocket ships. We've got cars and trucks and just all kinds of crazy computer technology and the cameras that we have now, taking video. I mean, Edison would have just invented like the moving picture, and now we're doing stuff like this. You could, of course, do this back in 20 years ago. And if somebody lived 100, very, very different world. So there becomes like a disconnect. They start to not recognize the world around them, and as the people from their generation start to pass away, they become lost. And that's another way of being lost to time, is they are just lost. They don't have the people they're familiar with around them, and they don't recognize the world around them. That would be a very, very scary place to be if they like didn't keep up with like technology or whatever. But still, it would be, I grew up this way and I've spent so many decades in this, and there was an evolution there. It's like, things start to change so fast though, especially over the past couple of decades of the last century. Just boom, 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 boom. Yeah. So another thing that we can look at here in regards to this. So as the years start to evolve, and as things start to get lost to that time, like, okay, I'm losing my, the woodworking part, right? There's information that starts to get lost. There's things that have happened in the past that we start to disbelieve, or we start scratching our heads about. How did that happen? Like, for example, somewhere along the way, we had the massive, we had the space race, right? This is, rocketry was taking off, and we had this massive desire to go to space and eventually get to the moon. And, you had Kennedy saying, get to the moon in this decade and do the other things and all that. For those that are familiar with the speech. Not because they're easy, because they're hard. That. Which, I do believe, you don't do the easy things, you do the hard things. That builds character, just as a little aside. But we had, that massive space race. And then we finally got there, right? We got to the moon. Like, all right, we're here. And we had a couple other missions there, and they were like, okay, we did it, we're done. And we never went back. And, we did the, orbiter, the space shuttle around the planet for a while. That was fun. We put up a bunch of satellites, Starlink going up there all the time now. But somewhere along the way, we lost the ability to go to the moon. Like those that are working on the Artemis mission right now, none of those were people from back in the day that were working on Apollo to get us there. So they've had to re-engineer the whole thing. Plus, we have new technology, all that great computer technology that we have today. They didn't have that back. There's more computing power in this than what took them to the moon to begin with. So it's been lost, and we're having to now try to re-engineer that whole thing. And because of that, then we start to question, did we even go there to begin with? Did it really happen? Because, there's all those conspiracy theories that there's good old Buzz sitting there on the moon with the flag. There's a lot of conspiracy theories saying that this didn't even happen, that this was actually filmed to make us believe that we went there. So I wrote a thing for when I was originally writing Connecting the Universe, the book. I wrote a little piece here that did not get included with the time travel book. It's still going to go somewhere within the series. But because I ended up deciding that Connecting the Universe was an entire series rather than just one book, this didn't really fit in there. So I've saved, but I'm gonna read it to you here, and I'll toss up good old Buzz again here for a moment, and we'll have another photo to go along with this. But let me read this paragraph here. We've seen in our lifetimes history fall away into myth and legend. When television broadcast Neil Armstrong stepping out onto the lunar surface in July 1969, most people believed it truly happened. However, since we stopped traveling to the moon following the Apollo 17 mission, more and more people have started to believe that the lunar missions never happened, that it was all propaganda in a Cold War effort to try to bankrupt the Soviet Union. Many theorists on this matter point to the symbolism in Stanley Kubrick's film, The Shining, based off of the Stephen King novel of the same name, as hidden messages that he directed the filming of the Apollo 11 lunar footage on a soundstage. Who would have directed and filmed all the other footage from the 5 subsequent missions to the moon seems to get overlooked in this theory, but it has caused enough doubt over the 4 decades since the Apollo mission ceased that a larger, ever-growing segment of the population has started to believe these journeys never happened. NASA's planned Artemis missions are supposed to take humans back to the moon. But if these plans were to be delayed by decades or even scuttled, the Apollo lunar missions would fall into even deeper myth and legend territory, and great-grandfathers sitting around the campfire would point up to the sky and tell the tales as if they were ghost stories. A lot of our legends and myths that get passed down, and we just deem them as legends and myths, are things that did happen. And because they seem so fantastical to us now that, oh man, there's no way that could ever happen, that, we've shied them away. It's just myth. It's just legend. Those are just stories. I mean, we have photos and video footage, but like with the Kubrick thing, people have started to more and more people have started to say, no, it's not. It was recorded. But I always point to okay, so you're pointing to Kubrick doing Apollo 11 and you're disregarding all the other missions, because if he did it on a soundstage for that one, then who would have done it for all the others? Somebody would have had to, right? That one always kind of gets overlooked. Then there's the idea, Jay Weidner has proposed to this. He put a documentary out a few years ago. It was interesting where, and I like Jay, where he proposed that we really did go to the moon, but because it was going to be the technology was going to be so difficult to broadcast all of it, and it was going to be a kind of a mess to do it all, that they recorded on a soundstage a lunar landing so that they could broadcast that to the people to see, hey, we're really doing it. But they still went. So that one's it's kind of interesting. It's a neat idea. But I don't know how many of you may have seen so a video that was it kind of went viral here some years back. There was this guy, I think he was doing a YouTube channel, or maybe he was a reporter for some rag or something, but he caught Buzz Aldrin coming out of some building, and he's getting all up in his face about faking the lunar landings and all this. How could you lie to the American public? Don't you feel ashamed to do all this stuff? And he's like right in Buzz's face, and Buzz just cold cocked the guy, and was storming off. And the guy's like, "You see that? You see that? You just hit me." It's like, well, yeah. I mean, for one, you're in his face, but two, I don't even think it's so much that you're trying to call him a liar as it was, do you realize how many of his friends died in the space program to make all of that happen? Whether you believed it went to the moon or not, Guys died during that whole process, and they were Buzz's friends. So you're basically insulting their memory to him. So yeah, of course he's going to deck you in the face for that. So let's see what kind of comments you guys have down here now for that. Oh, nice, Sarah. We sent Matt Damon first. Yes, we sent him to Mars, or something. Talking about Mars. Yeah, absolutely. Jill saying she saw the video about the symbolism. It's interesting. There was a New York Times article here that came out a few years ago with one of the guys that worked on the crew for that, and he basically tried to discredit it all. It's still, a very controversial topic. There are people that are pro, people that are against all of that. So yeah, there's a documentary that's like, oh, look at all the symbolism, and then you have guys that were actually part of the crew that are like, no, we did this for this reason, we did that for that reason. So it's, I guess, who you believe in the matter. Again, we're looking at going back, and we have to reinvent the whole process because the knowledge got lost to time. And now the story of those missions has almost become like myth and legend. It's really, really wild. So, all right. And there's Tom. I remember the entire space mission. Yeah, my parents routinely told the stories about sitting there and watching the lunar. I mean, the whole nation was basically watching that happen. It was one of those moments where everybody kind of comes together. And when we went back to, I shouldn't say back to Mars, but when we landed the rover on there. If I recall correctly, it was in July when that happened, and I was at my parents' house. And again, there were several people over. I think we were doing some sort of cookout or something. We had a bunch of family over, and there was everybody in front of the TV, watching us go to Mars. It was pretty wild. I'd never really experienced that sort of thing because we have, with cable television, streaming services now, and all that. There's so much out there, to watch and choose from, and all of that. Where, back in the day, you had, 4 channels, 5 channels, in UHF with Weird Al, and that was it. That was all you had back then. So it's different world. So I got to kind of experience there for a brief moment what, my parents did during that era, like, watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, stuff like that. So, okay. So, kind of going through my notes here. Sorry about that. Like I said, with that 2.5 hour interview, I'm a little loopy. Okay. So if that sort of thing, you think about this, we're talking the moon landing, 1969. So that was 55, almost 55 years ago, right? I guess it would have been 54 years ago. Yeah, because Jen and I were there, 54th anniversary on July 20th. We were actually there for the anniversary at the Space Center. So we're coming up on 55 years here. That's within our lifetimes, right? Some of us are younger. I'm a little younger than that. Some of us down here are a little bit older than that, but that's basically within, that's 2 generations. Okay. A generation is approximately 25 years. So that's basically within 2 generations. And we're already having these kinds of problems with lost technology and chalking stuff up to legend and myth. 2 generations. So now imagine this over thousands of years. Okay. When we start talking like, ancient Egypt and the pyramids, right? We're going to get there. Let's bring it back a little bit. So the hieroglyphs, right? That language got lost to time. And we know when it went out of out of practice. And it was around 300, 350 AD, where the last scribe that knew how to write and translate died. And then it took until 1822, the 200th anniversary was last September, of Champollion, um, announcing in a presentation there, with all the different scholars, that he had deciphered the Rosetta Stone. And he showed how he was, able to do it. With that deciphering of the Rosetta Stone in 1822, didn't mean that we had fully translated the hieroglyphs. There's still some hieroglyphs that have not been translated, but it took some decades to really get an understanding of it all. Gardner's list came out, I'll say 1921, which was a really extensive, basically dictionary of the hieroglyphic language. So that's, again, only 100 years ago. So it was thousands of years that this language had been lost to time. Well, what happened? How did it get lost to time? Well, you could say, well, they went out of practice. Yeah, but there's reasons why. So you had the Egyptians were in power for thousands of years. You had the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, all those sorts of things. But their power started to wane, and they eventually, what happened is Alexander the Great came in and basically conquered Egypt, because he was trying to conquer the world, and never lost a battle, and he conquered Egypt. So you had this massive, technically it was Macedonian, but you had this great Greek influence, and the Greeks ran Egypt there for a long, long time. And so, and Cleopatra, by the way, was Greek. She was from the Ptolemaic line. So you had Alexander the Great come in. Ptolemy was his top guy. And so she was technically one of the Ptolemaic kings. And the one that we know of, the famous one, was number 7. She was the 7th Cleopatra. So she was actually Greek, living there in Alexandria and Egypt. But her influence, of course, went all up and down the Nile. You see depictions of her and Caesar all over the place, that sort of stuff. Then you see a great Greek influence in a lot of the newer temples. And then when the Romans came in, of course, there was their influence all over. So what you end up seeing, like on the Rosetta Stone, pop this back up, what you see here, you have the hieroglyphs at the top, which is the part that is the most damaged, unfortunately. You have the middle, which is called Demotic. And basically that was a shorthand for the Egyptian hieroglyphs. So they were already, by this time, this was during the Greek era, they were already by that time, coming up with easier ways to write out the hieroglyphs. And that was basically the last part to get translated. The bottom part of it is Greek. And so they had that to go off of to try to translate the hieroglyphs. They actually figured it out via the Coptic language, and figured out that which is the Christian Coptics and Christian Egyptians, and their language was essentially a dialect of ancient Egyptian. That's how they eventually figured it out, which they could translate Coptic to Greek. So you had the different civilizations coming in, the different cultures coming in, Greek, Roman, etc. So the classic Egyptian started dying off more and more and more and more, because you had the Greeks in there, you had the Romans in there, all these other influences. And so eventually it became forgotten. There were less and less and less people wanting to learn it, wanting to become a scribe. Like the same thing with my dad in the woodworking. He's doing all this fantastic stuff, and I can do some. So basically, it's like, okay, if you look at this, my dad is the hieroglyphs at the top, right? I'm the one in the middle there, the Demotic, the shorthand, and my kids would be like the Greek down there, right? So so that's what happened. It just fell off over time, and it took thousands of years to figure it out all over again. So if you have that just from that one tablet, just the language, is it any wonder we don't know how these were built? How that knowledge, how that technology was lost over time? Yeah. You have some more comments down here. All right. David, when I was of school age, the British Museum wasn't such a big deal, and the Rosetta Stone was not in a case. So I've touched the Rosetta Stone. Awesome. And see, that's kind of the nice thing about back in the day where you could actually do stuff like that. So that's amazing that you got a chance to actually touch it. Yeah, so many things are just like really closed off these days. Like Stonehenge, you can't walk up to Stonehenge anymore. I haven't been to Stonehenge myself yet, but um, I've had, and I will here. Well, depends on how next year ends up happening, uh, but that will happen soon. But I've had so many friends go up there and come back and be like, "Yeah, such a disappointment. You can't, walk up to there like you used to back in the day. Where you just walk amongst the stones. Yeah, you can't do like European vacation, back your car into the stone and knock the whole thing over." Um, yeah, Yolanda, losing the languages of Native Americans or dialects of Central America. Yeah, a lot of that is being lost. Um, yeah, you hear about some of these small little cultures that are still left, where there's like three people that still know the language, and they're all like 80 plus years old, and then one by one, they're gone. And so you will have some people that recognize that and will go in with recorders and get them to say some stuff so that there's at least a recording of what it sounded like. But the actual knowledge of it is absolutely getting lost. And I mentioned it. When did I mention it? It's here recently, where one of the standard practices, from my understanding, from indigenous tribes, especially here in North America, was not to share a lot of their esoteric knowledge. They didn't want the English to know their legends and secrets and stuff like that. But some stuff, of course, has slipped out over time. We've gotten a hold of some of that. But my friend Clifford Mahudi, who passed away a couple of years ago, um, he was a Zuni elder, and they basically, I want to say excommunicated, but that would be with the Catholic Church. But basically, it's the same type of concept. Was they basically gave him the boot because he was talking about and telling people like us, about a lot of these different old legends and some secrets and things like that, because he was fearing. And I've other Native Indigenous people that I am aware of said the same thing, that they're afraid of those stories being lost over time, that there's not enough people anymore with that knowledge to pass it down the way it used to get passed down, which was mostly oral tradition. The different ceremonies and things that they would pass those down orally, and they were very, very meticulous as to the details of that. But because of the way our society and culture has grown here over the past 100 years, it's become more and more and more difficult to be able to pass that down like that. So now a lot of people are going public with this stuff and passing it on other ways. And that's actually my book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, when I referenced it in the section on the giants. It was back in the 1930s, a native Inuit named Michael Kazingnook. I mean, again, his anglicized name, but he was a native Inuit, and kind of the same thing. He feared that a lot of those old legends and stories weren't going to make it. They weren't going to survive through oral tradition because there just weren't enough people practicing that anymore because of the influence unfortunately, from us. And so 500 pages, handwritten, broken English, trying to make sure those stories got passed on. And I tried to be faithful to that in that particular book. So yeah, so it shouldn't be any wonder that a lot of these mysteries still remained as to how things happened thousands of years ago. So, I've had a number of people try to question, well, how do you just lose a technology like that? You this great thing that can be done, wouldn't you pass that on? Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, you might be able to pass it on for a while, but here's the thing. We know that there were great cataclysms that happened. There were floods, there were famine, there were earthquakes, all kinds of different things like that happened over time. Whether you believe in the great cataclysm, like you have all this debate now over, I don't know how many of you, we mentioned Gaia earlier. Yes, there's my episode here recently that was just released for Beyond Belief, but they started a new season of Ancient Civilizations. I do encourage people to check that out as well. There's a lot of debate over, one, did the Great Cataclysm even happen? And if it did, was it a comet impact? Was it a solar flare? And they're presenting both sides of the argument as far as, those are concerned. So aside from that debate, you even had, those times are very, very barbaric. So when like a tribe would come and invade, a lot of times it was genocide. So, if you lost your people that had that knowledge, the survivors that might not know how, maybe it was your engineers that you lost in this battle or in this famine or in this earthquake or whatever it was, you lost your engineers. The ones that actually survived, I don't know how those guys built that. They did it. I don't, or even if a couple do survive, they're not really going to be concerned at that point of building huge, massive, monuments and things like this. They're going to go into survival mode there for a long time. We need to rebuild our civilization. We need to farm some food. We need to do some hunting. We need to, build some huts over here just to, kind of survive and get things going again. And then over time, as they're trying to get that going once again, people die off and the knowledge is lost. So there's multiple ways that this sort of thing happens. Yeah. Let's see. Yolanda saying, writing down all of my weird experiences and things that happened. That's a great idea. Definitely do that. David, giant humanoids added to the scenario would be an easy explanation to these huge structures being built easily. Well, that could be helpful. I mean, some of these, you look at those, like the Trilithon at Baalbek. I mean, those would have to be massively, massively huge people. And I am on board with, yes, there were certainly giants here on Earth. Did they help with the construction of some of these things? Sure, that would make a lot of sense as to how some of these things certainly happen. I believe that there are other technologies there that were involved as well to be able to move. Obviously, we don't have the technology today. We don't have cranes or anything that can lift some of these. And you have some archaeologists. Well, they use wooden rollers. You're not getting the Trilithon on on wooden rollers. It's just not happening. It just really isn't. So there was something that was certainly lost there at the time. Like Sarah here, the pyramids are giant alien Legos. Yeah, no, I don't, and that's something I don't believe that the aliens built the pyramids. Now, was there some sort of knowledge or ancient civilization that was passed down to have made those? So there are stories, and there are many Egyptians that have stated over the years that no, these structures are already here when we arrived. We didn't build them. And you see this in South America too, with a lot of the structures that are attributed to the Incans, and survivors from that are like, no, these were already here. These were before These are from before. We've repurposed and we put other stuff on top of it. And you see that the less sophisticated stuff is on top and the, you know, higher technology is underneath. And it's like, yeah, no, it wasn't something that they did themselves. It was repurposed and passed on. You look at some of the bigger structures there, like in Egypt. Like when you look at the pyramids, when you look at something like what they call the Valley Temple, which is right there by the Sphinx. There's no hieroglyphs. You know, there's none of that detail that you see from what we call dynastic Egypt, with the the hieroglyphs all over the like Abydos or Dendera or anything like that. You don't see that in the Valley Temple. You don't see that in the pyramids. The only hieroglyphs that you could say you see at the Sphinx are on the dream stela in front of it, not on the Sphinx itself. And a lot of people, of course, made the argument that the dream stela is actually talking about restoration, and it's a marker to basically say that we restored it. In the controversial section of it at the bottom is gone. It's been rubbed away. There's like one illustration of it, and even the interpretation of that illustration is still controversial. So, yeah, it didn't. If this was your culture, okay, if this was what you did, this is the way you wrote, and your more sophisticated stuff are the bigger items that are the oldest, why isn't your language on here like you've been doing on all these smaller structures? It doesn't make any sense. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So those that are part of the Connected Universe portal, we're going to go ahead and kick into the after show. Those listening to the podcast version later, of course, please join us here every Wednesday night, 8:00 p.m. Eastern time. Lost to time. We have lost much over time, and we are still rediscovering many, many of those mysteries, and we will continue to do that here in Connecting the Universe. So, all right, everybody, until next time, time really exists.